My name is Emma Collins, and I'm 21 years old. I've always thought I had a handle on life, on what mattered, on what I could control, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened one night when my mom made a decision that changed everything. I lived in a small apartment in Boston, balancing my last year of college with part-time work at a local bookstore. I had my routines, my friends, my small but predictable life, and I liked it that way. Stability meant security, and security meant I could breathe. At least, I thought so. My mom, Diane, had always been a force of nature. She was smart, decisive, and unpredictable. Growing up, I had learned early that her decisions often affected me, whether I liked it or not. She had a way of acting as if she was saving me from mistakes while making choices that seemed to leave me powerless. Most of the time, it was harmless, like choosing my school clothes or arranging my weekend plans. But sometimes her decisions were monumental. That night, I was studying late, preparing for an important presentation at school, when I heard her moving around in her office downstairs. The sound was subtle at first, the soft click of drawers opening, the low murmur of her phone. I didn't think much of it, she often worked late. But after a while, I noticed her tone was different, hurried, almost secretive. There was an urgency to her movements that made my stomach twist with unease. I went back to my notes, trying to focus, but the thought gnawed at me. Something felt off. Around midnight, I heard the garage door click, the unmistakable sound of her car starting. I peeked through my window blinds and saw her drive away. She wasn't gone for a quick errand, she drove for hours. I couldn't stop thinking about what she might be doing. My mom was private, sometimes uncomfortably so, but this secrecy had a sharp edge I hadn't felt before. The morning after, the apartment was unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle and your chest tighten. I walked into the living room and froze. The grand piano, our family heirloom, a piece of furniture that had been in our home for decades, was gone. The piano wasn't just wooden keys, it was memories, milestones, birthdays, evenings of laughter, and tears. I ran to my mom's office, but she was gone. Her car was also missing. Panic hit me like a wave I couldn't escape. I called her cell repeatedly, but there was no answer. My mind raced. She couldn't have sold it without telling me, could she? The piano had been hers to decide about, technically, but it had been in my life as long as I could remember. This wasn't just a piece of furniture, this was part of my identity, my past, the rhythm of my childhood. I couldn't imagine waking up to a house where it no longer existed, where a piece of our history had been traded overnight like it was nothing. Hours passed, and I felt both lost and furious. I tried to piece together her reasoning. Maybe she needed the money, maybe she had a sudden idea, maybe she thought I wouldn't care. But deep down, I knew better. This was Diane being Diane, decisive, impulsive, and completely self-assured in a choice that would affect someone else without consulting them. That someone else happened to be me. By afternoon, my frustration morphed into action. I started searching for clues, emails, receipts, anything that might point to where the piano had gone. I remembered my mom mentioning a new antique dealer downtown last week. Could it be connected? My hand shook as I opened her desk drawers carefully, making sure she wouldn't notice. After what felt like hours, I found a crumpled receipt with her name on it, dated the previous night, and the amount, well, it was far more than I had ever imagined. She hadn't just sold the piano, she had erased a piece of my life in a transaction that had happened while I slept. I sat on the floor, the receipt clutched in my hand, and felt a swirl of emotions, anger, grief, disbelief. How could she make a decision like that, so monumental, without even talking to me? It wasn't just money or practicality, it was about control. She had chosen to act without my knowledge, and it stung more than I could explain. I felt small, powerless, and yet, a part of me sparked with determination. I wasn't going to just accept this. I couldn't. I spent the rest of the day researching the dealer, trying to understand how these sales worked, how quickly things could disappear, and if there was any way to trace the piano. The more I learned, the clearer it became, if I wanted answers, I would have to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't wait for my mom to explain herself, because I suspected I might never get an answer that satisfied me. I needed evidence, proof, and maybe, a chance to reclaim what was lost. That evening, I sat by the window with my laptop, scrolling through antique marketplaces, dealers, and forums, trying to find someone who had purchased the piano. My mind was racing. Could she have sold it out of desperation, or was this just a whim? Each possibility felt worse than the last. I realized that the quiet in the apartment wasn't peaceful, it was oppressive. It reminded me that nothing in my life was guaranteed, not even the things I thought were permanent. As the night wore on, I felt a mixture of fear and resolve. Fear, because confronting my mom could erupt into a fight I wasn't sure I could win. Resolve, because if I didn't act, the piano, and a piece of my past, would be gone forever. I thought about my childhood memories, the lessons learned at that piano, the music that had carried me through loneliness, heartbreak, and joy. This wasn't just furniture, it was part of who I was. And I refused to let it slip away without a fight. By the time I finally went to bed, exhaustion had taken over my body, but my mind wouldn't rest. I realized that my life had shifted in the span of a single night. The morning had been quiet, but the implications were deafening. I understood, more clearly than ever, that if I wanted to protect what mattered to me, I could no longer rely solely on my mom's decisions or her sense of what was important. From now on, I had to take control. That meant courage, strategy, and a determination I wasn't sure I fully understood yet. But one thing was certain, my life, my memories, and my choices were mine to fight for. And I was ready to start. The next morning, I woke up with a restless energy buzzing through me. The apartment felt even emptier than the day before. The absence of the piano was like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I could almost hear the ghost of the music that used to fill the living room, those delicate notes that used to accompany my mornings and calm my nights, vanished overnight. Every memory attached to it now felt raw, like an open wound. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen counter, staring at the empty space, trying to figure out where to begin. My first thought was obvious, I had to find the piano. But the more I considered it, the more I realized that just finding it wasn't enough. I needed proof. I needed to know why my mom had sold it, who she sold it to, and whether there was even a possibility of getting it back. I opened my laptop and started combing through everything I could find about antique dealers in the city, checking their records, and cross-referencing any recent sales. Hours passed. I hadn't eaten, barely drank water, and my mind was a storm of scenarios. Then I found it. A small, inconspicuous listing on a private dealer's website, the description matched perfectly. The age, the brand, the finish, it was my piano. And there was a name attached, a contact number. I felt a surge of hope, but it was mixed with a spike of fear. This was more than just confronting my mom. This was stepping into a situation where I had no control over the outcome. I debated whether to call the dealer immediately or try to talk to my mom first, but ultimately, I knew I needed the facts straight before any conversation. I called the number, my hand shaking slightly. A man answered, his voice calm and professional. I tried to explain without sounding hysterical, that I was looking for information about a piano that had been sold recently. He asked for details, the make, the model, and the timing. I gave him all I knew, careful not to mention my mom directly. There was a pause on the other end, then he said, "Yes, I have that piano. It came in last night. It's been purchased already, but I can give you the contact for the buyer." My heart sank and raced at the same time. Purchased? Already? The opportunity to reclaim it might be slipping through my fingers before I even knew it existed. But at least now I had a direction. I jotted down the contact info and tried to focus on my next move. I had to reach out to the buyer, explain the situation, and hope that they would understand enough to consider returning the piano, or at the very least, give me information on how the sale had occurred. While I was making these calls, my mom came home. She walked into the apartment like nothing had happened, humming softly, carrying her usual air of composure. I felt my chest tighten. She looked at me, smiled, and asked casually, "Everything okay?" I wanted to scream at her, ask how she could do something so monumental without telling me, without even a hint of consideration. But I didn't. I stayed calm, nodding, my fingers tightening around the phone in my pocket. She probably noticed my tension, but she didn't comment. She went about her morning routine, pouring herself a cup of tea, reading a few emails, and scrolling through her phone. And the silence between us was deafening. I realized then that this wasn't just about the piano anymore. It was about her power over me, her ability to make huge decisions without consulting me, and my realization that I couldn't rely on her judgment or her ethics to protect what mattered to me. By midday, I had contacted the buyer. A young couple had purchased the piano and, to my relief, they were kind enough to listen to my story. I explained that it was a family heirloom, that it held significant emotional value, and that I was willing to pay what it cost to get it back. They were understanding, but firm. The transaction had been completed legally. I felt a mixture of gratitude and despair. Legally, they were right, but morally, the situation felt completely unjust. After hanging up, I sat on my couch, running my hands through my hair. The magnitude of my mom's action hit me in waves. She had made a decision that legally she could, morally she should not, and she did it in the dead of night, knowing full well the chaos it would create for me. I realized that I couldn't keep living like this, on someone else's terms, subjected to their whims. Something inside me shifted again. If I wanted stability, if I wanted to preserve the parts of my life that mattered, I would have to be stronger, smarter, and more assertive than I had ever been. That evening, I confronted my mom. I asked her, calmly, surprisingly calmly, why she had sold the piano. Her expression was neutral, almost amused. "It was time," she said simply. "We needed the money, and honestly, you don't play it that much anymore. It was just taking up space." My stomach twisted. Not taking into account the memories, the sentimental value, or the fact that it was a connection to our family. "Mom, that piano isn't just furniture. It's a piece of our history," I said. She shrugged. "I made the decision," she replied. "It's done. You'll get over it." The words hit me like a slap. I felt my anger boil, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I couldn't change her, but I could control my response. I had already taken the steps I could to track the piano, to understand what had happened, and to maybe reclaim it. Her choice didn't define my ability to fight for what mattered to me. The rest of the week was a blur. I followed up with the buyer, arranging a meeting to see if it was possible to negotiate a return. I documented everything: emails, receipts, contacts, and even conversations with witnesses who could attest to the value of the piano. Every step I took made me feel a little more in control, a little more empowered. My mom noticed the change in me, the determination that had replaced the confusion and helplessness of the previous days. By the end of the week, I realized something important: this wasn't just about the piano anymore. It was about asserting my voice, about refusing to be passive in a life where other people often made decisions for me. I had learned that waiting for someone else to act would only lead to disappointment, and that standing up for what mattered, whether it was objects, memories, or my own principles, was essential. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the empty space where the piano had stood. I felt a strange combination of grief and resolve. Grief for the memories and the music that were gone, and resolve for the fight I had begun. The morning after her impulsive decision had been quiet, yes, but it had awakened something in me, a clarity about my boundaries, my values, and my determination to take control of my life. And I knew that whatever came next, I would face it head-on, ready to reclaim what mattered most to me. The following morning, I woke up with a determination I hadn't felt before. The quietness of the apartment still lingered, but it no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it was a kind of charged silence, like the calm before a storm, but this time, the storm was mine to direct. I had spent the past few days retracing my mom's steps, piecing together the chain of events, and now it was time to act. I couldn't undo what had already happened, but I could take control of what came next. I started by reviewing every email, receipt, and conversation I had recorded about the piano. I had a clear timeline of events: when my mom had taken the piano out, when it was delivered to the dealer, and who had purchased it. I even made notes on my own observations, her behavior, her secrecy, the subtle hints that had seemed inconsequential at the time. Every piece of information added to a picture that was undeniable. She had made a decision overnight, completely disregarding my attachment to the piano, my voice, and my family history. I decided my first step would be to reach out to the buyer again. I rehearsed what I would say, carefully crafting my words so that I could explain the situation without sounding accusatory or desperate. I knew I had to balance respect with urgency. When I finally made the call, I felt my heart pounding. "Hi, this is Emma Collins," I began, my voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. "I understand you purchased a piano recently that belonged to my family. I wanted to explain the significance of this piano and see if there's any way to discuss its return." The buyer listened patiently. I explained the history of the piano, how it had been in my family for generations, the memories tied to it, and the fact that it had been sold without my consent. I was careful not to make it sound like I was blaming them. I focused on the personal value rather than the financial aspect. There was a pause on the line, and then they said, "I understand. It's a beautiful piano. Let me check what can be done." I hung up the phone with a sense of cautious hope. This wasn't a guarantee, but it was a start. I realized then that my fight wasn't against the buyer, it was against the situation, against the feeling of powerlessness that had haunted me for years whenever my mom made unilateral decisions. The piano was just the catalyst. This was about reclaiming my voice, asserting my boundaries, and protecting the things that mattered to me. Throughout the day, I continued my research. I learned more about legal options, contracts, and the rights of sellers and buyers in private sales. While the transaction had been legal, there were nuances. If the sale was made under misleading circumstances or without proper disclosure of sentimental value, there might be ways to negotiate. Every detail I discovered made me feel stronger. I wasn't just a victim of my mom's impulsiveness, I was a capable adult who could navigate this challenge with strategy and intelligence. When my mom returned that evening, she seemed oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. She carried herself with her usual confidence, smiling, asking about my day. I answered, but I could feel the tension beneath the surface. She had no idea that I had contacted the buyer, that I had documented every step, or that I was preparing to assert my rights. She probably assumed I was still reeling, passive, accepting. And that assumption, her underestimation of me, was my leverage. I took a deep breath and confronted her directly. "Mom, we need to talk about the piano," I said, my voice calm but firm. Her smile faltered slightly. "I thought we already did," she replied. "It's gone. Why are you bringing it up again?" I looked her in the eye, my hands resting on the table, and said, "Because it's not just about the piano. It's about respect, about decisions that affect both of us, about listening to the people involved before acting. I want a chance to make this right." She tilted her head, studying me like she always did when I challenged her. "Emma, it's done. You'll just have to accept it." Her tone was final, the kind that usually shut me down. But this time, something inside me refused to back down. I reminded her, gently but firmly, that I had already spoken to the buyer, that there were options, and that I had every right to try to reclaim what was lost. I wasn't accusing her of being wrong, I was asserting my ability to act. The conversation didn't escalate into shouting, which was unusual for us. Instead, it lingered in the room, a tense quiet filled with unspoken recognition. I could feel her processing that I wasn't the same person who had stood by quietly while she made major decisions. I was 21, an adult in every legal sense, and I wasn't going to be silenced. For the first time, she didn't interrupt me. She simply listened. Over the next few days, I coordinated with the buyer, explaining the situation in more detail, sharing photographs and documentation that showed the piano's sentimental value. I offered to pay extra for the trouble and assured them that I wasn't questioning the legitimacy of their purchase. Slowly, the walls of resistance began to crack. They agreed to meet in person, to discuss a possible solution. Meanwhile, my relationship with my mom subtly shifted. She noticed the change in me, my calm confidence, my ability to navigate the situation without panic, my refusal to let emotions override strategy. She didn't like it, I could tell, but she also couldn't ignore it. I wasn't a child anymore. I had learned to advocate for myself, to protect what mattered, and to act decisively. The night before the meeting with the buyer, I stayed up late, reflecting on everything that had happened. The quiet morning after she sold the piano had felt like the end of something, but it had actually been the beginning. I realized that her actions, impulsive and unilateral as they were, had forced me to grow, to step into my own power, and to take control of my life. The piano was more than an instrument, it was a test, a challenge, a lesson. And I was ready to face it head-on. When the morning of the meeting arrived, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. I dressed carefully, rehearsed what I would say, and reminded myself to stay calm, respectful, and assertive. I wasn't just reclaiming a piano, I was reclaiming my voice, my agency, and a piece of my life that had been overlooked. The morning of the meeting, I woke up early, heart pounding with anticipation. The apartment felt alive, buzzing with a mix of nerves and determination I hadn't experienced before. I dressed carefully, choosing something comfortable yet professional. This wasn't just about reclaiming a piano, this was about standing up for myself, asserting my boundaries, and showing that I wasn't powerless. Every step I took toward the door felt deliberate, purposeful, and for the first time in days, I felt entirely in control of my choices. When I arrived at the dealer's office, the couple who had purchased the piano greeted me warmly. They were young, kind, and genuinely sympathetic when I began to explain the situation again. I told them everything, how the piano had been in my family for decades, the memories it held, the overnight sale that had left me blindsided, and my desire to restore it to its rightful place. I focused on the sentimental value rather than the financial, speaking with calm conviction that belied the storm I had felt inside these past weeks. They listened attentively, nodding occasionally, and I could sense their empathy. They understood, in a way I hadn't expected, that some things are worth more than money. After a long discussion, they agreed to sell the piano back to me at a fair price. It wasn't about profit for them, it was about doing the right thing. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, gratitude, and quiet triumph all at once. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I realized that my persistence had paid off, that my voice had been heard, and that I had reclaimed not just a piano, but a part of my life that my mom had thought she could erase. Returning home with the piano was surreal. I had imagined this moment countless times over the past week, and now it was real. I carefully guided it back into the living room, adjusting its placement so it fit perfectly as it had before. My fingers traced the polished wood, and I could almost hear the echoes of the past, my grandmother's voice, the lullabies I had practiced on it, the quiet afternoons of solitude filled with music. It was more than an object, it was a vessel of memories, resilience, and personal victory. When my mom came home that evening, she stopped at the door, clearly taken aback. The piano sat in its rightful place, gleaming in the soft light of the living room. I didn't speak at first, I let the moment linger. She opened her mouth, probably to say something dismissive or sarcastic, but I simply looked at her, calm, confident, and unwavering. She hesitated, realizing, perhaps for the first time, that I had taken control of a situation she thought she dominated. "I got it back," I said quietly, my voice steady. "It's ours again." She didn't reply immediately. There was no argument, no accusation, just a quiet acknowledgement, the kind that speaks louder than words. In that moment, I understood something vital. I wasn't seeking her approval or permission anymore. I had acted for myself, and that was enough. I had learned that life's most important battles are often won not by shouting or forcing others to see your perspective, but by calmly, persistently standing your ground. Over the next few days, the apartment slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, but something fundamental had changed between us. My mom seemed to tread more carefully, aware, perhaps, that I was no longer the passive, compliant daughter I had been. And I, for my part, carried a new confidence, a sense of personal agency that extended far beyond the piano. I had faced a challenge, navigated conflict, and emerged victorious, not just because I had reclaimed a cherished object, but because I had proven to myself that I could act decisively, think critically, and protect what mattered most to me. Sitting at the piano that evening, my fingers gently tracing the keys, I realized how much this experience had taught me. It wasn't just about reclaiming an object, it was about reclaiming my voice, my independence, and my ability to shape my life. I understood, finally, that control over my life didn't come from waiting for others to act or from seeking their approval, it came from recognizing my own power and having the courage to use it. Music poured from the piano as I began to play, a mix of relief, triumph, and newfound strength. Each note felt like a declaration: I was here, I was capable, and I would no longer allow others to dictate the value of my life or my memories. My mom stood quietly in the doorway, watching, saying nothing, but I didn't need her approval. The quiet morning after her impulsive decision had been the catalyst for a transformation I hadn't realized I needed. I had been forced into action, and through that, I had discovered a strength I hadn't known existed. That night, as I finally closed my eyes, the piano's melody lingering in my mind, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. The battle had been difficult, and the path had been fraught with tension, doubt, and fear, but I had navigated it. I had reclaimed what mattered, asserted my boundaries, and stepped into my own power. I had learned that even when someone you love makes choices that hurt you, you can still fight for what's right, you can still honor your values, and you can still emerge stronger. The piano, now returned to its rightful place, wasn't just an instrument, it was a symbol of resilience, courage, and independence. Every note I played reminded me of the strength I had discovered within myself, and I knew that from this point forward, I would never again allow someone else's decisions to overshadow my own voice. The morning after her choice had been quiet, yes, but it had set into motion a journey of self-discovery, empowerment, and triumph that would shape the rest of my life.